pull up before we start recording? Okay.
For some reason, I'm having a hard time pulling it up. I don't know why it won't. It keeps pulling up last month, so I think the clerk's office can add that to it on the back end, so we should be okay.
All right. Well, I think we can begin the regular meeting of the Advisory Committee on Housing.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Colleen Edinger is not able to be here today. She's on vacation, so you're stuck with me for your co-chair today. But thanks, everyone, for showing up. I think we have a lot of good things to talk about on the agenda. Something I wanted to mention just right off the bat, thanks to those of you who have filled out the survey we sent. I think we've got about 9 responses. If you haven't had a chance and you might want to use our first couple minutes poking in some answers to those questions while we're doing roll call, that would be great. Otherwise, you can always submit questions or answers later. But if you can, that would be great. But I think since we think we have quorum, Katie, if you could go ahead and call the roll.
I will do that. Sorry, I had it in front of me and then it went away. There we go. Karina Bowler. Bruce Brunner.
Yes.
Joey Dobson.
Here.
Chloe Jackson. Spolinski Jaycox. Queen Kimmons.
Yes.
Charlotte Kinsley.
Here.
Aliana Latron Garcia. David McGee.
Here.
Lisa Mears.
Present.
Melissa Newman. Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Here.
Maggie Oddie.
Here.
Scott Schaefer.
Here.
Janine Cedra. Oh, Janine is not going to be here. Cecil Smith.
Yeah.
Rose Tang.
Here.
Right, and Annie is not here. So we have 11 members present, so we have a quorum.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And at this time, we'll accept any motions to adopt today's agenda.
This is Bruce. I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Thanks, Bruce. Any seconds?
This is Colleen. I'll second.
Great, Katie.
All right, I will take the roll on that. Bruce Brunner.
Yes.
Joey Dobson.
Yes.
Queen Kimmons.
Yes.
Charlotte Kinsley.
Yes.
David McGee. David McGee. Go back. Lisa Mears.
Yes.
Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Yes.
Maggie Oddie.
Yes.
Scott Schaefer.
Yes.
This is David McGee. I have a yes. I had a hard time getting off of mute. Sorry.
Thank you, David. Cecil Smith.
Yes.
Rose Tang.
Yes.
11 yeses. That's adopted.
Great. Now at this time, is there a motion to accept the minutes from our November meeting?
This is Bruce. I make a motion to accept the minutes from last month.
Thanks, Bruce. 2 seconds.
This is Charlotte. I'll second.
This is
Thanks. All right, we'll go ahead with the roll.
Bruce Brunner.
Yes.
Joey Dobson.
Yes.
Queen Kimmons.
Yes.
Charlotte Kinsley.
Yes.
David McGee.
yes.
Lisa Mears.
Yes.
Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Yes.
Maggie Oddie.
Yes.
Scott Schaefer.
Yes.
Cecil Smith.
Yes.
Rose Tang.
Yes.
There are 11 yeses.
Great, that is adopted. Thanks, everyone. And now we'll move on to our public comment period. So this is the time in our agenda where we set aside time to hear comments from any members of the public who are not members of the committee. If you are here from the public and have a comment you would like to share with us and you're on the phone, please unmute yourself now by pressing *6 and let us know your name. I am not seeing any phone numbers on here other than I think Ben from Ward 10. But I will give it one more shot. If someone from the public is here by phone and you would like to share a public comment with our committee, please push *6 now to unmute. Okay, I don't think that there's anyone here for our public comment period, so we'll close our public comment period for today. Okay, so first part of our agenda is just kind of thinking through some things for next year, looking back a little bit on 2021. This is our first year with this composition of our committee. First thing, just sort of administratively, linked in the agenda is the proposed meeting calendar for 2022. So in our committee, shortly after our committee came together a few years back, we settled on this, what are we, the second Thursday of the month. So this is the proposed calendar for meetings for 2022. I think we were just going to open it up for any discussion. I think, we would all love to not rehash and try to move things around too much if we can avoid it. We know that this time likely isn't good for everybody, but just did want to give a little bit of time for any discussion on the meeting calendar for next year. Oh, thanks, Katie. So Katie's put it up on the screen too, so you can take a look. So this is the second Thursday of every month, unless any of them are adjusted for if there's a holiday on that day. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts or concerns or anything you want to share about our meeting calendar? Because we do have to formally adopt it, is my understanding.
I really appreciate the second Thursday. I was having some conflicts before in attendance due to a standing meeting, but the second Thursday works very well. So thank you.
Okay, great.
Hey, Joey, it's Karina. I'm on the call.
Hi, thanks. I'm glad you're here.
Yep, I'm here now.
Okay, great. We were just talking about the proposed calendar for our meetings for next year for 2022. So it would be sticking with the second Thursday of the month from 3 to 5.
Okay.
And we, at some point, I forgot even when we did this, but we moved from an hour and a half to 2 hours. I personally feel like that has given us some time to dig into topics a little more. So I'm generally in favor of the 2 hour slot, knowing that we can always end early if we get done. But I suppose that's also on the table for discussion if folks have thoughts about the 3 to 5 time.
Yeah, I'm okay with that part too, Joey.
Okay.
Joey, are you looking for a motion to approve?
I think at this point we are ready for that. I'm not seeing any other discussion.
I move it.
All right, thanks, Cecil. Any second?
This is Bruce, I second.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any other discussion. So Katie, I think we take the roll on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Karina Bowler.
Yes.
Bruce Brunner.
Yes.
Joey Dobson.
Yes.
Queen Kimmons.
Yes.
Charlotte Kinsley.
Yes.
David McGee.
Yes.
Lisa Mears.
Yes.
Colleen O'Connor Toberman.
Yes.
Maggie Addy.
Yes.
Scott Schaefer,
Yes.
Cecil Smith,
Yes.
Rose Tang.
Yes.
12 yeses, so that's approved.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, we are just sailing through our agenda here. The next thing that we wanted to do is just give folks some time to discuss kind of things that you thought went well or any sort of debrief from the year, since this is our final meeting of 2021. Thanks again. I think nine committee members so far have filled out the brief survey. We just wanted to make sure that we're collecting everybody's thoughts about how things were going as we're planning for 2022. So I have those the survey responses that we can put together and even share with the group for the next meeting. But just wanted to open up the floor right now for any discussion. I think it's always good to take a breath and debrief. How are things going? What did we think went well this year? What would we like to see different in 2022? And then after that discussion, we'll maybe open up some time for some concrete brainstorming of specific topics. So right now, just generally, what went well? What would you like to see done differently based on this last year that we've had together? And I see Queen in the queue. So go ahead, Queen.
Thank you. I think what went well was, we were able to get some things to the city council. I would like to see us come back in person and also get familiar with the new city council that's came in, because now that's changed over coming in January, and we probably want to familiarize ourselves with what and who is going to be in charge of housing and their take on what do they see as housing and what do we see as housing. So I think that would be a great a great thing for us to do.
Great, thanks, Queen. And maybe just quickly to respond to your comment about coming back in person, Katie, do you have anything to share about just, I meant to ask about that for our meeting calendar. Should folks be planning for January to be in person or remote?
That's a really good question. I believe we should tentatively plan on being in person. I might phone a friend if Lisa, I see she's raising her hand, may know more.
I believe the mayor did extend the emergency declarations for meetings through January, but whether that can change at any time.
So we will definitely update you via email because I think we are not 100% sure, but there is, generally speaking, I think a move toward returning to some in-person activities at the city. Staff are going to start, some staff are already coming in, but more staff will be coming in hybrid work modes starting after the new year. And so we will confirm about January, but I do think, again, with the caveat that there's obviously lots of uncertainty still, we will follow up and confirm about January. But hopefully we'll likely be moving to in-person at some point in 2022. Kelly, did you have something to add?
I just think it's going to be later than January. Personally, I've been in a couple of different calls recently where they're sort of hedging their bet on January 4th. So, but we won't know. And like Lisa said, the mayor's gonna probably will extend the, and then also we should just, Katie, try to find a place that people who want to join virtually and have an in-person virtual component. We should check on that because there may be people who still don't want to be in person, even if we can.
Yeah, and I know that we have some limitations around that with the public meeting laws, but one thing I will mention that we probably want to think about, I know we used to meet when we were meeting in person, we would meet in that conference room in City Hall next to the mayor's office. This was before this iteration of the committee, I think. But the new public service building downtown, there is a large conference room on the first floor of that building. And I think we could do our best to try to reserve that room when we do go back to in-person, because that would allow for people to really spread out. So I think we should plan on trying to meet there instead of in City Hall when we do go back to in-person.
Okay, thanks for that information. I know if nothing else, we've all learned how to be a little more flexible with our planning. So just, yeah, everyone stay tuned, and we'll get you the updated information as soon as we can on that. All right, Charlotte.
Thank you. So I was thinking about, in terms of the things that I think worked really well, I really appreciated the times when we had regular, like an update on how something is working, and then had space, like on paper, how it's being laid out, but then also had space to talk on the ground what we're seeing. So I really appreciated that. I would like that to continue. I agree that being in person, I would prefer in person as well, simply because I think we'd get through more quicker, I think. And then also I think we could get to know each other a little better, which could maybe help us draw on each other's strengths. So one thought that I had is, I don't even know if this is possible, but if there are ways to do, like when we've covered something, I don't know, like if we listen to a presentation on the different housing strategies, I thought that was really helpful, like the different strategies that Andrea presented, city strategies. If we could have time to debrief in a smaller group virtually, I don't know if we can do breakout rooms in a advisory committee like this, but I do think that might help us do some reflection on something that we've heard and maybe draw out different people's perspectives a little more. But in general, I think for a virtual meeting, I think great facilitation, it's working, we're covering good stuff. I appreciate this group.
Great, thanks. Great idea on, yeah, breakout rooms to the extent that we're staying remote. I like that idea of some small group debriefing for sure. Lisa, okay, I think your hand is down. That was on the in-person question. All right, Bruce.
I'd like to echo what Charlotte said. I think some of the presentations and then the opportunity to have feedback were amazing, right? Because it gives us a much deeper dive, and it gives us, here's a program that's in place, here's what's happening with it, here's the update, right? I think the other thing that I really appreciated was in some of those presentations and in general, I've learned a lot from specific people that I could then follow up with on very practical implementation of programs and feedback to dive deeper. So I would just say I think that's been a great success, because I reach out to a lot of city council people personally, because I know quite a few of them, and I take things from our committee. I don't say this is from our committee, but I utilize the information to say, I want to advocate more for this, and then I have more information to share with them. I'm personally an advocate for Zoom calls rather than in person. We have 20 people, and, the coronavirus variants and everything else are just getting worse. So I'd have a much higher degree of preference to not be in a room with 20 people unless everyone's doing a test beforehand and stuff. So I have, I'm older than most people here, and I'm very careful about my exposure to people. So.
Thanks so much, Bruce. It's really helpful to hear that perspective too on the in-person question and other things.
And sorry to interrupt. If I just follow up quickly on Bruce's comment, I think we could maybe get some guidance from the clerk's office as well. I mean, for city staff, there is a policy, and I don't know if the committee could consider, we may have to adopt it ourselves, but for the city staff, the requirement is either that we are vaccinated or testing on I believe it's a weekly basis. So we maybe could consider having a policy for the committee as well. And I think that's maybe something staff, we could follow up with the clerk's office and try to get a little guidance around that as well. So thanks for raising that, Bruce.
Great. I'm not seeing other hands raised, so please go ahead and just unmute or raise your hand if you have something, if you want to add about how things have been going in 2021 for the committee.
This is Colleen. I think that, you know, having been part of this committee before COVID, which feels like centuries ago, I do think we used to have kind of richer discussion, a little bit more interaction. And I think that's really hard to recreate in virtual meetings, especially at this point when some spend a lot of time in virtual meetings. I'm wondering if something like, you know, putting forth a discussion question and then kind of going through each member of the committee to get their comments on it or something like that might help. Let's have a little bit more discussion and a little bit less just updates. I've seen that work in some other kind of big advisory meetings where some people don't talk as much as maybe they would in person.
Awesome, thanks. That's a really good idea for facilitation and helping our conversations be more robust. Thanks. Other thoughts, topics that went well, process of, you know, thinking about how we have provided comments to the city council or to the city in general?
Joey, I just wanted to know, oh, sorry, Colleen.
Oh, this is Colleen again. I have a related question actually. And I asked this in the survey too. Do we have a sense, maybe no one does yet, of how the kind of straw mayor charter amendment is going to affect how policymaking moves through the city? You know, one of the things I think that's made this committee so valuable is that we get to engage directly with council members, the mayor staff, council staff, as they're shaping policy. And maybe it's too soon to know, but, you know, Katie, do you or other staff know what that process will look like and how our committee and other committees will play a role in policymaking from here on out?
That's a great question, Colleen, and kind of sort of aligned with what I was going to say, which was that Councilmember Gordon is here. And so I thought it might be helpful for him to weigh in on what's been helpful from a council member's perspective from the committee. But yes, it is a different structure. I think the answer right now, Colleen, is that we don't know. There's still a lot of work being done about what the structure, the government structure is going to look like, how the policymaking will work. But the council is still, you know, policymaking body for the city. And Andrea from the mayor's office, if you have anything else you want to add, that'd be great as well. But I think the short answer is there's still a lot being worked out there. But I do think it'd probably be really beneficial once it is more fleshed out for that to be shared with the committee and presented, so you then understand how to best weigh in. But I do think, Andrea, if you have anything to add on that, please do. And then Councilmember Gordon, if you're interested in just talking about what's been helpful from your perspective as a council member. I know you're here for a later agenda item, so I'm putting you on the spot, but if you would if you would be interested, I think the committee would be interested in that from your perspective too.
I'm starting waiting to see if the council member was going to jump in, but I can just address what Katie was mentioning. I think it's right on. There's a lot that we don't know yet about the logistics of how the change in the government structure is going to work. There's a working group that's working hard on that right now, and some of those conversations definitely can bring back either someone from our office to talk about it or someone from the coordinator's office, whoever the appropriate person is at the time once it's all sorted out, to describe sort of how that's going to work and how that will affect the committees. But I would just second what Katie said, that the council is still the policy-making body. So a lot of the things that come before this committee from the council perspective would still come from that perspective. I know that I intend to still be present here in these meetings from the mayor's office, and you know, I think for me, it's just really helpful to just generally listen in on the conversation and to hear what the different priorities and the conversation and the debates on this committee on whatever the issues of the day are. And then, of course, especially on the budget. I think those conversations are really important for me to listen in and take back as we're mulling over those same issues.
Great, thanks, Andrea and council member. Yeah, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Sorry if I missed a question directed towards me. I stepped out of the room for a second.
We were just as a committee taking a few minutes to debrief on 2021 and what kind of worked well. And so the question for you is if you have thoughts on what has been helpful for the council and from your perspective from this committee, and or any direction you would have for us moving forward, what might be more helpful from us moving forward.
Well, I think staying connected to staff and to policymakers is really critical and it's important. So hopefully going forward, there'll continue to be a policy aid and maybe a council office. It feels more connected and supportive. Having somebody from the mayor's office come and attend, so I really appreciate that. That's really important. And it not wandering too far afield of what are actually policymaker decisions that folks are worried about, at least from the council's perspective, is the most helpful. Of course, trying to influence what gets on their minds is really important too, because we don't want them to not be thinking of important things and take them up. But that makes, I don't know, that makes a big difference, I think, when it's timed right. And so what I tried to do was make sure we were asking you the questions when we wanted to get input and answers. And so I think that'll be really important going forward, is figuring out, because those of you who don't know, I won't be back next round. They bumped me over. But that's really important to figure out how to connect with that committee, maybe that committee chair, and stay involved and engaged. And quite honestly, if you give good advice and if you're supportive, and sometimes if you can champion, as you have been so gracious to do with me, because maybe we were championing one another. But anyway, some of the things we're working on, that also helps build that relationship and says, oh, this actually made my thing better. Thank you. And so it strengthens it. And you guys, I think, have done an excellent job of doing that. I haven't been at all your meetings, though, to see how far, what other kinds of things you get into and all of that. But from my perspective on the council, it's been really helpful, and I'm really appreciative. Those of you who don't know, this was really an important piece for me when I was going to be chair of the Housing Committee. And also, even before the last budget from the last term, getting a policy person, Katie Topinka, funding for that person was really important too, so that we could develop our housing policy much better. And I think it's made a big difference. So thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, council member. I think we all owe you. We wouldn't be a committee. We wouldn't exist without you helping to get this started. So thanks so much for your leadership on housing. And certainly having your aide, Robin Garwood, present at most meetings has been extremely helpful, just for kind of knowing what's going on and the status of things. So just, yeah, the support that your office has provided this committee and your support on housing, I can say, at least on my own behalf, has been really appreciated. And I think by all of us. So thank you.
It looks like Councilmember Schrader was on here, but now maybe he's not. And I missed, he had said he might stop by and I missed seeing that he was here. So I'm going to send him a note of apology that he wasn't here. But just wanted to note for the record that he was here for a few minutes.
And check out the chat. He says, thank you all for serving on this committee.
This is Karina. Can I weigh in with to echo what Joey just said?
Go ahead, Karina.
Yeah, Councilman Gordon. Yeah, as well. I want to say thank you for creating this this group. I think it's very important, and I thank you for listening to all of your council calls and by being so helpful with housing. And I can tell that you truly care. So you'll be missed as you go for other endeavors. So I just want to thank you for your service that you brought to the city council.
I appreciate that. You don't have to turn your meeting into something about me, though.
I know. I just was giving you your props. And
I really appreciate it, though. And Bruce, if you want to add something, go ahead. But I'm just.
I did want to add, because Cam, you have made such a difference in so many lives, and yeah, I just really appreciate your work.
Great. All right. Any further thoughts on things we want to kind of debrief on 2021 things, or maybe we can kind of transition to thinking about the new year, 2022, coming right around the corner, what things folks would like to see on the agenda substantively, or things you'd like to see. I mean, some of the ideas, you know, taking notes on all this that came up already, but if there are any other thoughts of things that folks would want to see look different for 2022, Andrea, go ahead.
I just wanted to note, when Councilmember Gordon mentioned the housing committee, it reminded me that the calendar for 2022 for what the committees are going to be in council is going before council tomorrow at the council meeting. So I put that link to the LIMS file in the chat so you can see what the council committee structures, which is I think very similar, if not identical, to the ones that have been in this sort of second half of the pandemic. So keeping the biz committee, which is where the housing items would land for the council. So I just wanted to share that with folks as you're paying attention to what committee to be paying attention for housing issues.
Thanks, that's super helpful because I wasn't sure whether the current council or the new council determined committee structure. So thanks, Andrea.
So I should note that it's actually the new council. So the calendar gets approved ahead of time. And this is Casey, this is the clerk's best guess at what's going to happen. But there will be a reorganization meeting in January where we'll find out who the president is and the vice president and the committee chairs and the structure. And sometimes there is some jostling and new committees get created or something will change, but it probably will be pretty stable. I mean, it's really hard to predict, but I just wanted to you're both right. We have a calendar that we're going to approve, but everything could change, Joey, because it's really the new council that picks the committees.
Great, thanks for that. Bruce, do you have your hand up? Is this a new hand? New raised hand? I know Teams is sometimes funky with whether it shows hands going up and down at the right time. Okay, all right. All right, other thoughts for next year?
This is Queen. I think that something that I would hope that comes forward is just to kind of, I don't know how you do it or how you get around it, but that buzzword of affordable that is not really, renters is not really seeing stuff as affordable. So I hope that we can really come up with some solution for people who, don't have a large income, and that we can really reach to those individuals. Make some sort of housing word or whatever it is that doesn't say affordable, because we're not really seeing what is affordable.
Thanks, Queen.
Oh, I recused him out.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Obviously, this isn't your only chance to get agenda items on. The survey's open and it's an ongoing conversation with developing agendas, but we did just want to give this time if there are things people wanted to share. The other piece I'll just note, I think for 2022, just as folks are thinking ahead, I think both Colleen and I are going to kind of step down from our co-chair duties. We've done it, I think, since the beginning. And so I think we just really want to make some space for others to take on those roles. So folks can be thinking about, interest in leadership roles in this committee or other ways that you want things to be structured. So I just wanted to just kind of put that out there as people were thinking about the new year for this committee. Okay, one final call. Any other comments or discussion on our 2022 agendas or anything else you want to share about how the committee's been going or how you want to see things look different?
Hey, Joey.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
would like to talk about. I'm sorry. I got a lot going on here, so I'm trying to like multitask. We don't have no lights in our building right now,
Oh my
so
gosh.
it's crazy.
Yeah, that's okay.
So yeah, I would like to get the Tenant Data Privacy Act put on the agenda to talk more about tenant, data, so that landlords can't use the information against them. And then what Queen said as well, making sure that we're having a discussion about, the word affordable housing to make sure that those who do not make, the higher income, are, being placed in so they're not being displaced because of, the places are unaffordable. So, let's keep that discussion on the table. And then I would like to piggyback, well, not piggyback, but like definitely, bring up the discussion about the tiering program with Kelly's office, seeing was there some sort of agreement, and get some updates on some past things that we're no longer talking about. So yeah, just, figuring all that stuff out, but definitely, Tenant Data Privacy Act so that renters are protected.
Great, thanks. I've made a note of that. I'll just then read off a few of the ideas so people know what kind of to expect from the survey. Affordable housing, homelessness prevention, TOPA, rent stabilization, closing the racial homeownership gap, following any funding that might come from the Build Back Better bill, direct communication with council members, prioritizing youth homelessness resources, city budget. A lot of these repeated. So just wanted to share with the group some of the responses from that, from the survey. All right, thanks everyone. We took notes of all of this. We've got the survey responses. So all of this will be captured and passed along. Katie, do you know, are we ready? Do we have everyone here for our opportunity to purchase conversation?
Yes, Michelle is here. Thanks, Michelle. So we can get started. Michelle Basham used to be on this committee, so welcome back, Michelle. And she has been working with the city as a consultant over the last several months on helping with this opportunity to purchase policy draft. So I'll kind of kick things off and then turn over to Councilmember Gordon first, and then we'll turn it to Michelle for the presentation. So last year with a different committee, that we did give a presentation. So wait, let me back up. In September 2019, the council had a study session on opportunity to purchase policies with guests from Washington, D.C. After that time, the city brought in consultants to do study on different potential opportunity to purchase policy options that the city could pursue. The consultants were Twin Cities LISC and the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development out of Washington, D.C. That report was presented to the City Council and also to this committee last year. And then in the spring, the council gave us a staff direction to draft an ordinance with a policy framework. And so we are going to present that draft today that we've been working on. I do just want to note that the draft we're presenting today is not scheduled for council consideration at this time. There's not a public hearing scheduled. It would have to be reintroduced next year by the new council. So we're presenting this draft today to make you aware of it, go through, get questions, get feedback. But we don't know right now what the next steps will be when the new council convenes next year. But we did want to make the committee aware of the work that has been done this year and give you a chance to understand it and give some feedback. So with that, I'm going to ask, so the authors of this are Councilmember Gordon, Councilmember Schrader, which is why he stopped by briefly before, Councilmember Ellison, and Councilmember Fletcher. So wanted to give Councilmember Gordon a few minutes to give some comments on it before Michelle presents the draft.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And this opportunity to purchase is something that got identified several years ago and was listed after several big community meetings and engagement. In fact, we had some council members who were involved in a national anti-displacement effort because this problem of displacement and people being pushed out of the cities because of affordability or other matters have been going on for a long time. And so this was identified as one way to prevent that. Also, we've seen in our city a big disparity in terms of race and home ownership. And this is also was identified as a way, well, maybe this is a tool that we could use to help address that and help families, people build some wealth. And so we're very interested in exploring it. Of course, I'm very disappointed that we weren't able to get it done this term. I'm pretty confident that Councilmember Ellison is going to reintroduce it and is going to keep carrying it through. So out of the authors, at least one of us has survived the pendulum swing or whatever you want to call what has happened. And so it should be coming forward. And I think we have now, because of the work of our staff and consultants, built a pretty good model. I have to tell you, this is a very complicated policy. It's also a policy that requires many pieces to be successful. In Washington, D.C., there was actually lots of funding. There were community organizations who got involved. One of the big things that we are hoping it will do will help people who live in smaller apartment buildings and they're able to cover the rent, but they might not actually qualify for a loan to buy it, decide they want to become a cooperative and purchase it. That's been some of the best success that's happened out in DC. We also have a big problem in the city of Minneapolis, though, with a lot of our rental property being single family homes and lots of them being duplexes and some of them owned by corporate entities that have a whole bunch of them. So it's a little different here than it might be in DC and other cities, because that seems to be an area that could be really ripe for people to get into the home ownership realm and world. And if they had this opportunity to do it, they could. But of course, it takes financing and lots of other things. But first, we have to create an ordinance that kind of would give people this right of first refusal and this opportunity. And as you could imagine, and you'll probably hear from, there's lots of people with concerns about it. What about my property rights? Shouldn't I get to sell to anybody? This is my future and my retirement. What are you doing to me? And those kinds of things. So there's lots of details to work it out so that we find the right spot for it to be successful in Minneapolis on both ends. So I'm going to turn it over now to, I think Michelle's going to give you more of the details and the overview, but please look at it carefully and think about it carefully, because we want to find the right balance and we want it to actually make a difference.
Thanks, Councilmember. And I might just, if I may, sorry, Michelle, just briefly. So as a committee, I think for today, so what is our task at hand here? I mean, some of us have heard some of this presentation probably in other arenas, either as part of this committee or otherwise. I think, like has been mentioned, the staff and the folks working on this are doing some stakeholder engagement last week and right now. Although the actual policy will need to be reintroduced if it's going to move forward through the legislative process. So I would say we kind of have, as a committee, I'm thinking we sort of have two options of what we do with this today. We could either kind of compile all of our questions and concerns and submit, that we bring up today, and I can kind of take notes of those, and then we can, Michelle will, I'm sure, take note of them, but we can also then submit them in writing so that they are kind of part of this body of public comment for this stage. Or the alternative would be we discuss and consider any motions for us taking a more formal position, or, all voting on a statement of, where do we support it, do we not, what is our concern? I think it would be maybe my suggestion that we do something more like the former, since this isn't a proposal that is actively being considered by council right now. That said, I do think all of us have valuable thoughts on this as the policy is continuing to be worked on. And so I would love for our committee to have sort of a formal, a say in this. So that would, I think, be my proposal, but if others have other opinions, so that would be, I would just take as good of notes as I can about questions, concerns, comments that our committee brings up, and then just make sure those get submitted. Both to the sort of public survey or public submission place, and of course that'll get to Michelle. Temperature check, does that seem like a good plan for today? Do we want to do more? I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. If anyone is opposed to that plan strongly, please just let me know. Okay, and afterward, if anyone can make a motion and we can decide what to do with it, but that'll be the plan for now. So thanks everyone. Thanks Councilmember and Katie for the introduction. Now we'll pass it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Sorry, Michelle, we keep cutting you off from starting. I did also just want to note, I believe Michelle's going to share a presentation on the screen. We have a couple of people on the phone, but the presentation is linked on the agenda, so you can view it by going to the link on the agenda. All right, now you can actually start, Michelle.
Like for real this time? All right, well, thank you. It's really wonderful to be back with this group. I enjoyed all of the wonderful conversations and amazing work that the Housing Advisory Committee does. And thank you, Councilmember Gordon, for your comments and your great leadership on this. It's been an honor to be part of this process. I'm going to make a brief presentation and walk through this PowerPoint, and then if you wouldn't mind holding your comments and questions until the end. I have one more preamble first. So today has been a day that I have not been getting along so well with my internet, or rather maybe it hasn't been getting along with me, so I'm going to apologize in advance. Hopefully I will not have connectivity issues, but in the event that I do, I apologize in advance. And my great partner from the team, the Opportunity to Purchase team, Katie, can hopefully jump in if I get knocked off. So can everyone see this?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so we've had a team working on this for a while, starting with some really great work by LISC, and then following the work that LISC did and a really thorough national scan, as well as a series of pretty comprehensive public input sessions from a mix of stakeholder advocates, as well as realtors, renters, property owners. LISC put together a report that was presented to the Minneapolis City Council, and based upon that, the Minneapolis City Council, which Katie referenced earlier, issued some direction to city staff. At about that time, city staff hired me to draft the ordinance and sort of shepherd the project through. And so, a couple of things to say about the Opportunity to Purchase and why this is really a great opportunity. And despite some of the criticisms of it, both in Minneapolis and across the country, this really could advance some of the city's goals with regard to renters' rights, as well as displacement, like Councilmember Gordon said, but also some of the concerns and reports that have already been written, including by some members of this committee, related to the disproportionate impact of displacement on BIPOC communities, and in particular, the impact of BIPOC communities in places like North Minneapolis with eviction efforts, and the disproportionate rates of homeownership comparing Caucasian individuals to BIPOC individuals. This policy really aligns with other policies that the city of Minneapolis has been working on for a while, in particular Minneapolis 2040, as well as the Unified Housing Policy. And in drafting the ordinance that you have been able to see today, we did really try to balance renters' rights with property owners' rights. So if you are familiar with the TOPA policy in Washington, D.C., there are some key differences between the TOPA ordinance and this. There are also a couple of differences between the LISC report and the draft that we came up with ultimately, with the goals of balancing the rights of property owners with the rights of renters and some of the other city goals. Some of the benefits for renters is it really does create an opportunity for home ownership, as well as a clear pathway for ownership for renters. Minneapolis has been for a while now a majority of the residents in Minneapolis are now renters, as you are probably aware. And for that reason, as well as because of issues of growing inequities, Minneapolis has become increasingly committed to really wanting to be thoughtful and proactive about protecting the rights of renters and wanting to make sure that they have equal footing in negotiating their rights with regard to leases and rent negotiations. This ordinance creates a clear pathway as well as some clearly spelled out processes and timelines for them to be able to purchase rental properties if a rental property owner decides to sell that property. It also creates an opportunity for small developers, nonprofit groups, BIPOC developers, and small owners to get into the business of home ownership and rental property management through this process. And although sales of properties will not, and we don't anticipate them coming close to the full time periods anticipated in the opportunity to purchase ordinance, it also does anticipate a financial incentive for property owners, recognizing that although this does create some other it does create some other natural parties that could purchase their property. It also does limit their options for the period of time that they are bound by this ordinance. It also gives the city an opportunity to purchase properties when an owner decides to sell a rental property, and ultimately also protects and preserves affordable housing options, which, as we know, unfortunately, are dwindling. So our first presumption is that all rental properties within the city of Minneapolis are covered by the opportunity to purchase ordinance unless they are specifically excluded. And broadly stated, there are two types of exclusions. One type of exclusion is because of the size of the property. A second type is, three types. A second type is because of the owner living either in the unit. So that would be things like a duplex or a fourplex, either the owner or a family member, or an accessory dwelling unit. Either the owner lives in the primary unit or the secondary accessory dwelling unit. The third type of exemptions is transfers within families or outside of families, transfers within revocable trusts, transfers to a public agency, and some limited types of corporate or organizational transfers where there is no consideration, or in other words, not a financial value exchanged. One of the key considerations that is currently under this council direction to staff exempted is that small properties owned by individuals, and by that we specifically mean rental properties that are 1 to 4 units owned by individuals who have a portfolio of 5 or fewer rental properties in the city of Minneapolis, as it is currently written, would be exempted from this. We will talk a little bit more about that in a second. Well, maybe not in a second, but maybe in a second. So we looked quite a bit at different data that was available to us within the city related to the impact, particularly on what we call SREAP communities. Within the Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan for the city of Minneapolis. We have 3 zip codes that are targeted by SREAP, and those include 55411 and 55412, which, as you probably know, is North Minneapolis, and 55404, which is in South Minneapolis. I believe that is the Phillips neighborhood. The location of these small unit properties that are excluded, there are 23% of them in SREAP zip codes and 77% in other zip codes across the city of Minneapolis. 20,901 small rental properties are considered these small units. Another way to look at the exemption impact on small properties is that, subject to the opportunity to purchase ordinance citywide, is that about 18% of the small unit properties would be subject to it, and about 82% would be exempt. Within SREAP zip codes, 31% would be subject and 69% would be exempt. And again, SREAP zip codes are North Minneapolis 55411, 55412, and in South Minneapolis 55404. This is a two graphs showing the same thing I just talked about. So next I'm going to walk through the process and the steps covered by the ordinance. So the very first thing that happens is a property owner decides that they want to sell their rental building, and they issue a notice of intent to sell to the renters, the renters organization, if there is one, the city of Minneapolis, and any qualified organizations that have been identified by the city of Minneapolis through a competitive RFP process, request for proposals. The property owner then has to give an opportunity to the entities to submit a statement of interest. And we used a cascading series of rights to approach this, meaning who has rights first under the ordinance. And the entity that has rights first under the ordinance is renters and renters organizations. Renters and renters organizations under this ordinance would have a couple of opportunities. First, they could decide to proceed with their rights under the ordinance. A second option is that they do nothing. A third option is that they assign their rights to a qualified organization. They can assign their rights to a qualified organization for non-financial reasons to a qualified organization only. This is one of the areas that we differed from TOPA in Washington, D.C. We did that because there's a variety of literature and analysis that in Washington, D.C., the assignment right, which in D.C. you can assign to individuals or to organizations for benefits in the rental property that are non-financial in nature or for direct financial benefits to the renters in total or individually. There's been a fair amount of analysis that has led to some fraud and abuse and has also led to increased examples of gentrification. For all of those reasons, we decided to limit assignment rights to qualified organizations and not for direct financial gain. There's a lot of different points of view on this. We welcome comments and feedback, but that is the draft as it stands right now. If the renters or rental organizations either do nothing or expressly decline to proceed with their rights, then the rights fall to qualified organizations in the city of Minneapolis. Regardless of which entity proceeds with their rights under this process, I also want to talk a little bit about the size of units and how we determine who represents renters. If it's a single unit building, that's easy enough. Then those renters in that single unit decide whether or not they want to proceed. If it is 5 or more units, they need to form a renters organization with greater than 50, with a simple majority, which is 51% or more. They also have to identify a supportive partner to work with. As part of this process, the city will identify supportive partners through a process posted and advertised by the city. Supportive partners will play a couple of key roles to this process, including navigating renters and renter organizations through the process of securing financing and following a commercial transaction all the way through to closing, as well as how to develop a property management plan and all of the things that they need to do for that. In smaller buildings, specifically 2 to 4 units, they will not have to form a renters organization or identify a supportive partner, although we would certainly encourage them to do that. However, the majority of households and renters will need to agree to allow the majority of units within the building will have to agree to proceed with their rights under the ordinance. And when they, in doing so, if a simple majority agree to proceed, who proceeds can take any form. So it could be one of the units, it could be 2 of the units, it could be all of the units, as long as a simple majority of the units agree that they want to proceed under the ordinance. If a simple majority cannot agree in a small unit building, any one of the renters in that building could still try to pursue a purchase. They just would not be able to pursue a purchase subject to the rights outlined under the opportunity to purchase ordinance. For transactions that move beyond a statement of interest, sellers then must allot time for renters to complete things like submitting an offer and providing earnest money of 2%. And also, if that first offer is rejected, allowing time for a right of first refusal after third-party offers are received. And once an offer is accepted, time to secure financing and close the transaction. On this slide, it is showing the steps I have just talked about, only in a slightly different way. And on the next slide, it's illustrating the time limits for each step. For each of these steps, because we recognize that the larger and more units a building has, the more complex the transaction is going to be, particularly from a securing financing perspective. And so the larger the building, the more time they have allotted. As was stated earlier, this entire ordinance and presentation is available appended to your meeting materials. We also have a website available with all of the opportunity to purchase materials, including the full draft ordinance and an opportunity to submit comments on an ongoing basis. The city is going to utilize a phased-in approach to this because it is very complicated. In fact, it will be one of the most complicated ordinances adopted by the city in the city's history if it does get adopted by the new city council once they're sworn in. It is also very dependent on appropriating adequate resources for staffing and funding to implement this because it is so complicated. We want to implement it in phases as that funding and staffing becomes available. We also want to implement it in phases by building size, starting with smaller unit buildings. We did that based on feedback that we received from the community. And in total, we think it'll take about 3 to 4 years to fully implement the entire thing after the city council appropriates the resources necessary. And of course, if they pass it. So next, I'm going to close this. Are there questions?
Great, thanks, Michelle. If folks want to go ahead and raise your hands and we'll go through questions and comments. So first I see Bruce.
Hi, Michelle. I'm a housing provider. I own 1 to 4 unit housing. I'm a general contractor. I renovate and I build. In order to renovate or build new properties, sometimes I sell other properties, and I need to do it fairly quickly in order to capitalize on the opportunity. Under this format, it could take up to 5 months if someone designated that they wanted to try to buy one of my properties. And you said there's a designation of a 2% earnest money. If they don't complete it, do they lose their earnest money? Or if it's not completed, I'm obviously losing both opportunity and money. How am I compensated?
So Bruce, I'm hearing a couple of questions in there. Thank you. So a couple of things. One, part of the council direction to staff is that newer buildings, specifically construction that's 10 years old or newer, would be exempted from this. So it sounded like potentially some of your properties would be exempted.
Most of my properties are 100 years old.
Then those would not be exempted. But thank you, Bruce. The current draft also anticipates, but admittedly there are not details spelled out yet, but that the city council consider and implement some process for providing property owners some financial compensation for the period of time that they're involved in this process. Number 3, I'm trying to think through all of the questions that you asked. Like with any commercial transaction, you could negotiate the terms just like you would in any property transaction. And in your purchase agreement, you could negotiate that if the parties backed out, they would waive their earnest money.
In almost all the cases, when I put something up for sale, it sells within a week and I can close between 30 and 45 days. So if they're matching, if I understand your slides correctly, they're matching an offer. Are they matching exactly the offer? Do they have to match exactly the offer?
Well, you can't market your property if it's subject to the ordinance on the private market until you've gone through this process and first given the opportunity to renters and renters organizations.
I understand. So if someone makes me an offer, I can turn it down and put it on the market.
And then renters and renter organizations and any of the parties to the ordinance who had submitted a statement of interest would have a right of first refusal.
So there's 45 days. They say they're interested. I say $500,000 is what I'm going to put it for sale. If no one meets that 500,000, they have a right to match it, right?
Correct.
And that's when the process starts. Really?
The right of first refusal?
Yes, right?
Correct.
Okay.
If I'm tracking your question.
Yep. So then if I get an offer, they can match the offer, but they have to match the same offer. That's what I'm asking, right?
Nothing in this ordinance takes away. I don't know if Katie, you want to add anything to what I'm saying. It looks like you do.
I was just going to say, I think Bruce is right in what he's saying right now, that for the right of first refusal, if it got to that point, they would have to match the offer.
Okay.
So
there
sorry,
would be
Michelle.
something on the back side that, if they're matching an offer, they lose. I mean, the whole point is I can't wait 5 months to see if they can actually close, right? That's any owner would be worried about that. So I'm hoping you're thinking about how do you affect that? And that's my only questions. Thank you. I appreciate the.
And I think we've thought more about the actual price and not necessarily, and my offer is I'll close in 15 days or something like that. So maybe we need to, I mean, you raised a good point, Bruce, and stuff that we should think about. Because when you kept saying matching the offer, I was wondering what details are you actually thinking of in terms of that offer? And maybe the closing date is part of why you choose somebody over another and even a little less money. I don't know, but yeah, interesting.
It's often a myriad of things. So, and oftentimes it's, you're picking someone to sell to because you have a extremely high propensity to be able to close. That's one of the most important things, especially for someone like me that's turning the money into other things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce.
I have a question. This is Karina. How would a tenant purchase a property with a low credit score? And so it would take 45 days for a tenant to give the notice of intent of looking to purchase the property. And then my last question would be, how long would the tenant have to negotiate with a contract with the owners? With the property owner.
So thank you, Karina. I think I heard a couple of questions. One question was about a low credit score. And another question was about how much time would the renter have. So a couple of things. You raise a good point. One of the things that's going to continue to be challenging that this ordinance does not solve for is issues around people being able to navigate the process of securing financing or being able to solve for issues like low credit scores. That being said, renters can choose to work with a qualified organization is one option instead of proceeding on their own. And potentially by working with a qualified organization and negotiating continuing to have maybe some participation and decision-making rights in the rental property. That could be a way of getting the financing if the renter or renters have low credit scores. Another option is that if you have to form a renters organization, depending on the size of the rental property, then the purchase would be done by the renters organization, not by an individual. And that being said, then you have to qualify that gets into a whole different area of business credit versus individual credit. My third answer related to this is that supportive partners could also, part of their role is also supposed to be helping individual renters as well as renter organizations. Well, first to help renters navigate the process to form a renters organization, and then second, to help renters organizations navigate the process to secure financing. There also are some mechanisms within the city of Minneapolis, as well as private nonprofits and organizations in the Twin Cities, to help secure financing and help leverage low credit scores. We haven't completely figured all of that out. As with any city ordinance, one of the things that would need to happen if and when this is passed is that we would need to also adopt an operations manual and a compliance manual spelling out some of these details. So if you pick up on some hesitation with some of the details, that is because even despite an 18-page ordinance, which apparently is really long for a city ordinance, all of the details have not been spelled out yet.
Okay.
And Karina,
okay, you can go.
I was going to say, with regard to the timelines, there's timelines at each step in the process provided to the renters or the renter organizations, and those timelines depend on the size of the rental property. So my answer would depend on, is it 51 units or bigger, or is it a single unit or 4 units?
Okay.
And so.
Okay, so like, what would be your estimate number of, just to say, like, how long would a tenant have to negotiate the contract with the owner? Like, is it, if it's 45 days to give it an intent to say they're thinking about it, how long would it take for the tenant to negotiate? Just like off of just a number, because I just want to make sure that this ordinance is in protection of low-income renters. So if the renters, don't have bank accounts and don't have the education, or economic, education to sustain this building long term, will they, be, forced kind of to learn, how to preserve this now new form of income, of owning this property. And then, just the education pieces was hitting me, because I keep seeing the word low income on this ordinance that's in DC. Our committee that I sit on nationally, we've talked about this too. But I just want to make sure that if this is being presented to low income renters, why not just build more affordable housing within the city, and then, provide these educational courses for low income renters so that people can get that building wealth, and making sure that they understanding that it takes a lot to own a property, and you don't want to just get this property, get it taken away, and then some nonprofit company come in and buy up, the 411 area code, which is North Minneapolis. So we don't want that to happen as well. So, but I just was trying to just get a number, just a number to that time, just to let, if it's renters on this call that's possibly going through this right now, we want to know, like, what's the number, that they have to negotiate.
So I'm hearing a couple of comments from you and questions. Unfortunately, Karina, there's not a hard and fast number of amount of time, because it really does depend on the step in the process and the size of the. But I also really do hear and validate what you're saying about how critical it is to make sure that we're really thoughtful about the importance of providing supports for renters to be able, if we're going to do this, it needs to be done meaningfully, including things like how to secure financing and credit education.
Yes.
All right. Thanks. So, Colleen, I see you next first, though. I'm just going to read some of Queen's comments in the chat, since I know we're supposed to kind of make sure those get out there. They're in the chat for those who are on here, but Queen, scrolling, asking about neighborhood organizations like PPL, Urban Homeworks getting involved. We need to place a right of first refusal that people who live on the neighborhood or on that block, so prioritizing local owners or purchasers seems to be a priority. The property should stay within a buyer in that neighborhood if possible. And then another question, who's going to give gap funding to the renter? So another concerned about the financing. Just wanted to lift those up from the chat. But then next, we'll go to Colleen.
Thanks. Hi,
do you
Michelle.
want-
Oh, do you want to respond to those first? Go ahead if you do.
Yes, I'd like to respond to those briefly if I could. So, hello, Queen. It's nice to see you again. In this process, we got a lot of really good feedback early on from a variety of stakeholder groups, including Urban Homeworks and PPL, as well as IX and various, as well as Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. They were crucial and critical throughout the process. Trying to think of like some of their we had a couple of neighborhood-based organizations from the north side who were involved, have been involved throughout. Pillsbury United Communities, we had a couple of staff from there who have been involved throughout this process as well. In addition to developers and some property owners who have provided feedback throughout this process. To your first comment / question, to your second point, neighborhoods should get first priority. I've made note of that as a recommendation. So thank you. Colleen?
Sure. I took a lot of notes because this is really complicated. And, you know, one of the things I want to echo from Karina is that if this is really going to take a big investment from the city to staff this up, to get this policy right, I want to make sure that the city does it well enough that it actually has an impact on the residents that we hope will be, positively impacted by this opportunity to own. I could see that if it's not done well, there could be a ton of city investment and very few people actually successfully making it through the process to own their home. And so that's, I guess, a caution to the city about understanding, what the impact will be. I also wanted to echo Bruce's question about what it means to match the terms of an offer. It is about so much more than just the dollar amount of the purchase. Investors can make cash offers, they can waive inspections and waive contingencies, agree to take properties as is. A lot of, smaller, tenant groups or individual tenants aren't going to be able to make that kind of offer. And quite honestly, they maybe shouldn't. Those are risky things for, a kind of someone who owns fewer properties and has less wealth to be able to do, like to take a property, no questions asked. And that just needs more exploration in the process. I also had a question about you kind of showed that chart of what in smaller properties, if a majority of the tenants agree that they want to proceed with the purchase, you don't need all of the tenants to agree. So I want to understand what happens under those renters who don't want to be part of the purchase. Do their neighbors who buy the property then become their property managers? What happens there is confusing to me. And I also had a question about how you identify which properties are subject to this policy. You mentioned that it's for single family homes, and forgive me if I'm not getting the detail right. It depends on how many properties the owner has an interest in the city. Does the city have that kind of information? Is that something so much of that is kind of tucked behind LLCs? I'm curious if the city even knows who has an ownership stake in every property. And honestly, if you do, that would be really useful for a lot of policymaking and property oversight at the city. I think those are my questions. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Colleen. It's nice to see you. To the last question first, yes, the city does have access to that information. However, we also have had some robust discussion on the team about some limits to our existing data and database to be able to track this once implemented for enforcement purposes, and have begun to kick around some solutions to strengthen that, we'll say. I think your next comment / question with regard to small units, yes, it could have the functional impact of if we live in a 4-unit property and 2 of the units proceed under this and buy the rental property and the other 2 units agreed to it but were not involved in the purchase, that 2 of the units would become functionally then the property owners and managers. The property owners, and we would continue to be the renters. And I think I saw a comment from Councilmember Gordon. Should we read that?
Well, we've worked really hard to try to get the information about ownership, but you're right. I think that sometimes it's hard to know. And we have some property owners that, especially when we tied to revocation of your license, once you have 2 licenses revoked, you lose all your licenses. We saw more people working harder than to have a business partner own one, a spouse own another one. And so it's hard sometimes to actually know, and all the information on LLCs, we ask to know that, and sometimes we can't. So that's something that I think we could work much harder at. I think you raise a lot of good points too about the financing and who can afford this, and and so did Queen. So obviously, for this to work successfully, there has to be some supports in place and some funding in place from the city or elsewhere for it to work. And we have to keep talking about that, even as we're changing the rules. Just changing the rules isn't going to be enough. We're going to also have to somehow build some infrastructure to support this and help people make the right choice and have the support ability to be successful when and if they do, or prepare to make the right choice years ahead of time when they realize, oh, I might actually have a chance to buy this sometime, and maybe even tell the owner, I'm interested in buying it, Bruce, when you're ready to sell, and give me a heads up, and I'll try to get my closing stuff all together so we can pull it off. But whatever. But yeah, sorry.
I think Cecil has a comment or a question.
Yeah, so I see Queen. I don't know if you have a new comment, but in the queue is Queen first. Okay. If you have a new thing, and then Cecil.
Yeah, I'm not gonna hold up a lot of time. I live in 55411, and after going through the ordeal of Mahmoud Khan, I think that I think there are people like myself that would benefit. I certainly don't want to throw $150,000 of my hard-earned savings and try to go out here and purchase something without the right kind of gap funding, understanding gap funding from the city, if there's even going to be any of that. I think that the other thing that I'm interested in understanding is, and maybe David may be able to chime in here, if it's 4 units or less, then it will be treated as a single family income, and you might not have to go through all these preliminaries to get approved. If it is more units, then it starts looking like commercial and investment. And I think that I would look to the city to give us more knowledge about how that works. If this is going to be a program created just for people who are renters who want to co-op or co-house, and what that looks like, and if that's going to be something that we're going to adopt as a charter or whatever it is, policy in the future. So I think that there's a lot of more questions in my mind about trying to be an investor of something like this. And I'm gonna recuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you too, Melissa.
Did you have anything, Michelle, you wanted to add there? Okay.
All good comments.
Yeah, and I am taking notes too. So Cecil, you're next.
Thanks. Good to see you again, Michelle. A couple of points of concern. One is the interaction. So we're having a lot of changing housing policy, inclusionary zoning, which is on the development side, the potential for rent control, adding TOPA. Those are a lot of changes in a housing market potentially happening over a very short period of time. And has there been any modeling, any understanding of what all of those effects combined, let alone individually, would have on the market? So that just seems to be a point of due diligence, that we would really understand what we're doing when we're changing so many things at once and how the market might react. The second point is, and I think a lot of people have alluded to this, including yourself, that there's just a lot of infrastructure to build out here to do this well. There's a lot of capacity building for organizations to be able to serve and facilitate these transactions, as well as the capacity that the city has to have. My understanding from Washington, D.C. is they invest millions of dollars in their TOPA program every year. Has there been a cost-benefit analysis to say if home ownership is the goal, would it be a better program to say, let's really ramp up capacity building and down payment assistance and credit repair assistance and all the things that would help alleviate some of the impediments to home ownership, especially addressing, the egregious home ownership disparity that we have, and that the cost benefit of that would be more effective than building out this infrastructure? And would we achieve as many home ownership opportunities using TOPA versus using some of the other tools that many other cities and states have embarked upon to address home ownership disparities? And because we could spend several $1 million on this and complete a few transactions a year and say, oh yeah, well, look what we're achieving with TOPA, when in actual fact, if we had spent several $1 million helping people with all the other issues that are impediments to home ownership, that we could actually complete many more transactions and get many more people into home ownership and have a little bit more of a streamlined process than what is a very, very complicated ordinance with many things that we're still having to figure out, including how even all of this interacts on a regulatory basis with things like rent control, which, because the ordinance says that if it's rent restricted, it's not subject to TOPA. Well, once everybody's under rent control, we're rent restricted.
So a lot of good comments, Cecil. I'm not sure if I should respond, if you're looking for a response or just comments. I don't know.
I just want to make the comment. I just think those are really big picture, and that's just stepping back and saying, let's set TOPA against some other capacity building things that we could be doing in the city, where there's actually a little bit more national experience and best practices around addressing things through, let's work with individuals and build capacity and build financial capacity and get them into home ownership and then track them after that, much like what David does at Build Wealth.
Absolutely. There are a lot of different options to achieve the end goal, which is preventing displacement.
And there's costs associated and benefits that, hopefully we can measure. But I do have a question, and that is, was there anything in the city council budget allocated for TOPA that was just passed?
So opportunity to purchase has not been passed or introduced yet. And
I understand that, but was anything in the budget?
Yeah. I'm sorry? And no funds have been allocated to this yet.
Yeah, Michelle, I think the question is, was there anything in the budget that was adopted last night for this policy? Yeah, I believe the answer is no to that.
Thank you.
But if I can just add, though, wanted to that, and if Councilmember Gordon has anything to add, but there are programs in CPED's budget that, if this type of policy were to be adopted, would contribute toward it, such as the small and medium multifamily pilot, and so certain, programs that would help with acquisition, or could help with acquisition if this were to be adopted.
All right, so I put myself in queue to provide a couple comments, and then I see Charlotte next. So I'll just share a couple things. I mean, first, I would highlight that from my experience in working with other advocates in the community. The whole notion of this really is supported by renter community. It kind of came from community. I know it's been considered by the council at study sessions, so I just want, and there have been a couple examples here locally where groups of tenants successfully did band together. So I just wanted to name that this is an idea coming from at least some groups of people that it's intended to impact. And, you know, as a firm believer of, you know, people who are most impacted by a policy know, you know, are the experts in what they need in their lives. And so I really applaud at least the creative thinking in trying to address the disparities in homeownership and the access for folks with lower incomes to get there if they so choose. A couple things about the policy as it is crafted now, I think, don't necessarily further that goal. One, the two key ones being the not being able to assign the right for financial benefit, not being able to sell it, right? If we're talking in real terms, that is one of the key points. And kind of to Colleen's point about, I mean, I'm listening to this and it sounds complicated to me. Would I be able to navigate it? Would I have the financial wherewithal to, you know, you can easily see how someone could get to the point of being skeptical of how likely it is that renters themselves would get to the point of ownership, and how many renters they're out there. We've seen it happen, but how many renters really want to become the owners of multi-unit buildings? Some maybe, some maybe not. And so that's where I think the saleability, being able to sell it, is what really is the potential for the leg up for that person financially. Is now I have this asset, I have this thing that's worth money. At least I can sell it to then maybe turn the proceeds of that sale into a down payment for the home I really want, which is maybe a small single family home wherever. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think that's, if the goal is helping mobilize, you know, resources to the people who have historically we have shut out of the opportunity to make a down payment, that's just critical for this policy to kind of actualize that goal. And then the second thing is I remain, and I know I've shared this before, but I remain very concerned about the exemption for the small unit buildings and just who, in what neighborhoods, who is that going to impact? I do understand and understand the notion that for smaller landlords, there's less cash flow, there's less time to wait. I hear that, I hear Bruce, I hear that. And I worry that the consequence of this is going to be single family and duplex homes, specifically in North Minneapolis, in the S3 zip codes, or just, you know, places where we know Black renters are more concentrated. I'm concerned that this is going to have the impact of being more available to more well-to-do and maybe more white renters. And I think that's a real concern, just from a mismatch of, you know, stated goal to the concern of the outcome. So something that I would love to see would be data on, you know, where are these properties, right? Like mapping the city. If this policy was passed tomorrow, let's look at a map of the city to see which buildings would or would not be impacted, or you know, and then see who lives there. And I think that would just be a really critical piece of analysis to do on this with regard to the exemptions and who they might impact. So those are just a couple comments I wanted to throw in. I don't need a response. They're just kind of concerns or things to be thinking about, but I definitely appreciate the spirit of this ordinance.
And thank you for all of that, Joey. We do have data on the distribution of small unit properties. And certainly Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, I do not believe we have data on the demographics, though, of who lives in those properties. And then it might, sorry?
Yes, I think that's true. But, you know, we do have census data on kind of demographic information of who's living in zip codes and things like that. So you can, I mean, while you may not know who's living in every property there, you can make some assumptions based on that type of data.
Good point, do some overlays. And then I was going to say, maybe we could say just a little bit more about, and certainly Joey, I welcome if you want to add anything, because not everybody as who's part of this group has been eating and sleeping and breathing this stuff as much as some of us have. So in Washington, D.C., as part of this, renters have the right to sell for financial gain or other things, they can sell their rights under the TOPA policy in Washington, D.C., either to, they don't call it qualified organizations there, but something comparable, or to individuals or other entities. Joey, do you want to add anything to what I said, just so we all know what we're talking about with that? Okay.
I'd actually like to add to that from someone who owns properties. What Joey's kind of talking about is taking some of the rights from someone like myself who owns the property and taking it from me and giving it to a renter who doesn't have an ownership share, but has the ability to profit from my ownership. So it's in Washington, D.C., and this was alluded to earlier, there were a lot of abuses to that system of being able to assign the rights. And in Washington, D.C., they actually removed single family homes from TOPA because primarily these abuses, right? They did a 6-year study where 95% of the designations where people were going to said they wanted to go through the process never materialized. Part of it was that they either couldn't complete it or they tried to sell it, and there's a lot of information available of surrounding that. And in most cases, anyone who is other municipalities that are trying to adopt things like this have not adopted assignability. So I hope that isn't put in, because that becomes a really, really complicated piece that it opens to abuse or fraud on bad actors' parts. I'm not saying on renters' parts, but bad actors' parts. So thank you.
Thanks. We have Charlotte and then Cecil in the queue, but I did see Councilmember Gordon raise your hand, so I'm going to give you an opportunity, assuming it's kind of on this conversation.
Yes, it is. And I've got concerns about selling the rights to, and maybe there's a way where it could work somehow, but I can imagine that if the rights were sold to some entity that was just a developer that just wanted to flip a property or something and make some money, we wouldn't be addressing I mean, Joey, you described a kind of nice scenario where somebody would get enough out of their selling their rights for their apartment building for a down payment on a single family home, which would be amazing, but that's not the kind of stuff we'd hear about happening a lot. So in DC, it would be more like they'd sell their rights for not very much, but it would seem like tons, $1,000 or something like that. And then they'd be able to go and move somewhere else and think, great, I got, $1,000 for nothing. And that's an example I'm making up totally out of my head. But there's just a concern about that, is would that really help us address displacement and actually the home ownership cap or not? Or would it just mean that we have kind of predator investors who are trying to make this work out for their profits? Now, we could put so I guess what I'm saying is maybe with certain restrictions and parameters on it, and said it has to be one of these predetermined developers, or the city itself could participate in that if we thought it was somebody who then would end up helping us address the problems that we're trying to address. Maybe it could work. So I'm open to that, but I also confess that I was one of the council members that had big concerns about making that part of it.
Understood, and thanks for sharing that perspective. I just put in the chat, I think it would just be helpful to maybe see some of this, we hear about the scary things that happened in DC. If some of that could maybe be distilled and provided, I think that would be really helpful. And maybe that exists somewhere and you could point us to it, but thank you.
And it might not. So some of this came from early meetings that we had with activists in DC and organizations who were doing this when we were exploring it. So that's kind of where at least what I'm grabbing came from. I think that Bruce maybe has an article he knows about or something, but I'll see what I can find. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to Charlotte. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to quickly say, I mean, as a general idea, I love it, but I am a bit swimming and it is just super complicated. And so I'm going to loop back to, I think, Cecil's question about that cost benefit analysis. So like, is there anything with previous models that does sort of compare the investment of funds and energy to the payoff to renters? Has that been done? And maybe that was done in the exploratory phase, but or is there anything that we could look at in terms of that cost benefit analysis?
I'm not aware of anything that has been done in other cities. We have not done that in Minneapolis. Michelle, I don't know, did you?
Well, I was going to say there's not a lot of places where this has been implemented fully, other than DC. DC does produce annual reports on the production under TOPA. I am not aware of a cost benefit analysis in DC, however, and there are smaller jurisdictions across the country where something similar has been implemented, although not on as large a scale. For example, there's two counties, I want to say two counties off the top of my head in Maryland where this has been implemented, something similar anyway. And then in several different jurisdictions across the country, they're considering something similar.
Thank you.
This is Corinne. I want to say something. I do have to go. My house is getting dark now because the lights is off in the building still. So me and my kids have to try to find something to eat. We just took our flashlights. So, but I do want to say this before I go. So if it's possible, and tenants have to come up with like down payments and stuff. Let's just say if the property is listed for like $250,000, how much money, earnest money, would the tenant have to make as a down payment?
Under the ordinance?
Yeah, under the ordinance, yes.
As it is currently drafted, 2%.
2%. So that was, so would they, okay. I'm trying to do the breakdown. I'm over here because I'm curious, because I definitely think this needs to be tabled and further discussed with renters and understand what's best for low-income renters, because a lot of low-income renters, of course, cannot have $30,000 to $40,000 in their bank account, you know, if they're, you know, receiving any kind of government assistance or anything like that. And then, you know, if their low income is working, you know, a $12 an hour job, they probably do not have $30,000 to $40,000. So if $25,000 is listed for the property, would the tenant need at least $3,000 of earnest money as a deposit? And then do they have to make another reoccurring, a bigger amount as a 20% down payment? And that's just what I'm summing up.
Well, that would depend on the structure of the financing agreement, which is impossible to predict.
Well, it's impossible to predict, right? It's impossible to predict, but I think it's a good idea, but it definitely needs to be made to a tenant's perspective, because the engagement, you know, definitely needs to be make sure that low-income renters are aware of this, you know, and being, you know, put into the discussion, and to the tenant association. When I have a tenant association in my building, and to have a tenant association to be considered legitimate, you know, you would have to, you know, definitely make, you know, some changes for the tenants. And again, to go back to what everybody almost said, you know, not everybody would agree to this process. You know, so what do we do with those people who don't agree? You know, we have to be responsible enough to say, you know, or transparent enough to say, okay, well, this is not what everybody wants, but some of us do want this building so that we could build this wealth for each of us, you know, and make this a collaborative discussion. But I think it's a good idea, but I think it's something that needs to be tabled. And as to add to the survey question, items like this should come before us as they're being planned, so we kind of know how to deal with this, because this is tough. And we want to make sure that low-income renters are not being displaced because they don't have the funding or the, you know, the credit as they, you know, rent score or their credit score to be able to obtain and keep this housing. So, but I do have to go because it's getting dark in my house, and so I hope somebody can help me with that because our lights been off since 7 this morning, and it's not going to turn back on till 6. And we have disabled tenants in our building, so I'm getting kind of irritated right now. But I do have to go, and I hope you don't need me for a quorum for the end of a vote, but I do have to go, and I thank you, Michelle, for coming today.
Well, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, I have Cecil next in the queue.
Thanks. I certainly was pleased when I saw that the proposal came out without the monetization of assignable rights, because that was again and again something about Washington, D.C. that just stood out as a real problem, and certainly created a new set of predators in the housing market, which we have enough problems with predatory lending and predatory managers. And so I just wanted to make that comment. The other question that I have had is in terms of stakeholder engagement. In terms of building capacity, it seems like you need lenders or debt capital that's available for some of the scenarios that you've described. And has that been investigated, whether that exists, or would the city itself need to create and sponsor a mechanism so that some of these larger transactions that are not typical in the marketplace, I mean, there is not a lot of co-op lending that happens in this marketplace. There are other parts of the country where that's more commonplace, but we really don't have a market here locally for that. And then to be able to do this at scale, you've got to have many other elements of capacity, and that includes the financial markets. And has that been investigated with stakeholder engagement there?
Thank you, Cecil. I think my brief response, and then I would defer to Katie and Councilmember Gordon if they have additional input or points of view, is that yes, the lenders and debt capital is a critical issue. There's no funding attached to this yet, and that would be critical to the success. I am aware that, and I don't know if there's anybody still from Family Housing Fund in this group, but Family Housing Fund was trying to explore some strategies not only to promote BIPOC home ownership, but also BIPOC rental property ownership and co-op lending. Hopeful that that'll get some traction and some feet under it. Councilmember Gordon or Katie, any additional?
There is a Riverton cooperative that has done some investing, and it's been expanding in Minneapolis now for a while. I'm not sure if they would want to help other people, but they may. But also LISC has done a lot of projects in DC. So LISC is a national organization, and they also have a local, and they did some of the study for us. And there seemed to be some growing interest in it. If we did this, that they would want to participate in some of that. But absolutely, we're going to need to kind of grow that interest in that market. To do that, I'd say to some of the smaller folks, even the land trust, there seems to be an interest there that they could help and provide some gap if it had long-term affordability and those kinds of things too. So I think it's something that could happen if we develop the program, and I think we should probably expect it to be slow and move carefully at first too, but I think funders will come. I would advocate that the city could participate in it as well. And if it passes, they should work hard to have some funding there. That could be a revolving fund even that could help hold properties for a while and help other people purchase them. So, I mean, those are good points. And every time we talk about it, I try to emphasize the need to have funding for it if it's actually going to work, and also technical support.
Yeah, I don't have much to add beyond that, other than when LISC and CNHED did the study last year, there were a number of developers and lenders involved in some of those stakeholder sessions. And then just to Councilmember Gordon's point, LISC has been continuing some conversations locally to try to identify funding mechanisms if this were to be adopted. But I think that more of those discussions will need to happen, Cecil, to your point, if this is to keep moving forward.
Thank you.
All right, I am not seeing any hands up. So if anyone has any other questions or comments on this, you can go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this has been a really great and robust discussion, and I defer to Katie, of course, but you know, at some point after the new year or whatever, if you guys wanted to discuss it again, happy to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely think there's interest, and presuming it does move forward in the legislative process in the new year, I think that this committee does want to continue this conversation. Bruce, I see your hands. Go ahead.
I just offer out on a personal basis for people that have some questions. I've taught over 100 people, families, how to buy duplex, triplexes, or fourplexes, both in South Minneapolis and North Minneapolis, and 30 families have bought them after I've taught them the financials. So I'm more than willing to talk to people of how that process works. And I would really resonate with the Family Housing Fund because they have an initiative that they started a year ago. I don't know where they're at right now, to put in a system to teach people around credit repair and financial literacy and what it takes to own a rental property. And they are just such a wonderful organization, and they've tackled this to be the resource behind trying to help people go about securing housing, because as I tell people, owning a rental property is difficult. I own a bunch. I have a lot of tenants. It's hard, right? But it's also the most affordable type of housing to buy. So I'm a huge advocate. I'm just careful around putting policies around that that put things in place that you know, harm some people and help some people, but this is really complicated, right? So, but I just want to offer that out in case anyone wants a deeper dive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. And I'll make a note of that idea for, you know, maybe when this does get kicking again in 2022 through the new council, you know, between you and Colleen from Family Housing Fund, I think some of that knowledge being shared about those initiatives and your expertise would be really helpful for this committee. Any final thoughts, questions about this or anything else committee business wise before we wrap up from anyone? All right, well, thanks everyone. Oh, Lisa, go ahead. Lisa, did you want to share something?
I'm just always concerned when property is changing hands with the health of the property, with things like lead hazards and radon hazards and asbestos hazards. And I'm not sure where those concerns fit into this ordinance, especially if you have low-income people that aren't used to purchasing a property and the maintenance that's needed to live in one safely. You know, just simple things like changing a furnace filter, you know, which will destroy your furnace if you don't change it over time, or could kill you with carbon monoxide, things that can come up from stressing your furnace. So I like Bruce's offer of assisting people in how to actually maintain a home or maintain a rental property. But I just don't want to lose sight of that connection between the health of people and the housing they live in. I'm just not sure how that fits into here, and I'll be reading this more closely to look at that, to see what we can add maybe. And by add, I mean financial resources to help those things happen before purchases happen.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think that's really important. Okay, so for this conversation, what I've done is I've done my best to capture everything that was brought up. And I think we can just submit that through the open process that's open right now. So if everyone's cool with that, I will make sure that gets done. Yeah, and I think we're almost at our end. Thanks for a great calendar year. We did a full year of Zoom Teams meetings together, and I think we did a lot this year. So excited for another year. And thanks again, Councilmember Gordon, for all your support of this committee and various housing policies. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was great that I could be here. Appreciate it. And good job, Chair, running a great meeting.
Thanks, and thanks everyone. Take care, stay healthy and safe for these next holiday weeks, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, everybody.